I wonder if what people feel they suffer from claustrophobia is nothing more and nothing less than a physical manifestation of the confining of the spirit to the body. We identify ourselves as the body if we're not careful and we're not mindful of spiritual things. And this is horrendously confined compared to the freedom the spirit has, unlimited in all directions. Spirit is not spatially defined, and we're defining ourselves as the body, which is incredibly spatially defined and narrow. Is claustrophobic to the unlimited dimensions of the soul. In other words, the claustrophobia is the result of a misunderstanding of the self. Your self is not this physical body, you are spirit. And spirit is not defined by location. It's otherworldly, if you like. It's you can think of it in terms of it's a different dimension, or you can think of it in terms of space as being unlimited. It can be anywhere and move to anywhere. It's consciousness at any time. It's a spirit. So there isn't a problem of, how fast can you travel and how long will it take. It has the capacity to experience whatever it wants. And the problem is, it needs special schooling so that it can want what is good. Now, in terms of the mind, we try to train the mind so as not to be drawn towards thinking of and doing what is harmful to us, which includes, of course, what we think and do as regards the environment around us, including other persons, people, and so on, and their effect on our happiness, narrowly, except there be love, in which case our concept of self now as a spirit is greater. So perhaps it's the case that claustrophobia comes from a realization that one's narrowness of location and preoccupation of the mind is too cramping compared to the freedom that the spirit needs to enjoy for full happiness. And we need to visualize remember, automatically be experiencing the being of a free spirit. Free. Its freedom will depend on what we're talking about as regards heaven. The harmony or disharmony such freedom would bring. So, I mean, quite simply, if you have someone who, in the civil world, is doing something against the law, then we try to constrain their behaviour, restrict their freedom, such that they don't cause the breach of the law, which is probably some damage to other people. And ideally we do this as kindly as possible. As regards the person we're constraining, often society doesn't do it kindly, it executes a criminal or locks them up in appalling conditions. And obviously that's not right from the point of view of loving and caring for all creation. So we are to train our spirit to be harmonious with the differences and the variety that there is that we would encounter, such that we might have greater freedom. But freedom to, of course, because of our inward propensity, freedom to do good. We are not purposed to do harm, that which would harm others. If you are purposed to harm others, then others, of course, civilization, start to constrain your freedom to harm them. Perhaps mildly by just moving away from your company. Perhaps majorly by locking you up somewhere, killing you even. Restraining you by fear, perhaps. And there are ways of constraining others that we feel are very unacceptable, very unkind, such as exactly those things like killing them and so on. And we still might separate ourselves. We're not in fellowship with, but we are perhaps civil still. We say good morning. How are you today? And if they're in great need, the Samaritan's on the road and he realizes, well, this is an enemy, but I think I will interact with him here because he's going to die if I don't do something about him. And he rescues him into an inn and he's looked after. But the Samaritan goes on his way. He's not one with the person he's rescuing. He's simply rescuing them because they need it. He's concerned about them. He doesn't have to, devote his life to the person he's rescued. The Jesus view is, well, you should love such a person as yourself because he's rescued you from death, and therefore there should be a tremendous willingness in you to bless him back, to be a harmony to him. And then we find, of course, that such situations of being rescued start to build bridges between previously inharmonious groups of people. They come to a way of harmonizing, not destroying their differences. They might compromise their differences where they actually think it it is best to make such adjustments. But majorly harmonizing differences so that they are more of a blessing to each other, less isolated perhaps from each other, more ready to help and to trade perhaps. And there'll be rules about the trade that seem just to both sides. It's not devotion to each other, but it is harmonious interaction. And that's lovely, isn't it? You go into the shop, the assistant there doesn't necessarily have your way of life, but you can interact with each other on a certain civilized level that is beneficial to both. He has a job and you buy the goods that you need. And you have an interactive basis now where you start to love each other and perhaps understand each other better, why the differences are there, and that may start to affect the differences and will almost certainly build a greater harmony. Well, hopefully. You could find such a disharmony that starts to overshadow the gains you are getting. So coming back to claustrophobia, it may be simply a thought manifestation of speaking to the person about the way they've found their spirit to be so restricted to the body that their freedom is defined by the body, not the spirit. So if the body is trapped in some situation, then they struggle desperately for the body to be freed. I suppose if we were adept at what I think is called astral projection, where the spirit can leave the body, you'd be much less fearful of claustrophobia. You'd be much less subject to concern for claustrophobic situations because you would know that you, the person, the spirit, cannot be constrained by what the body is constrained to do. You could leave it at any time. And presumably at death that's exactly what does happen. You leave the body. So death is not to be so desperately struggled against as you thought, because you, the spirit, is leaving anyway. Now, a mindfulness of God at times when you get near death, or the fear of such, might greatly reduce its fear. If you trust very much that you will be with God in heaven, then, or even that you move on to the next life if you're believing in reincarnation, then you would be far less concerned about your fears and predicaments. Fear would be dissipated by such. So I was concerned to have a kriya, a repetitive statement that underlines the freedom that you have. You are spirit, you're not body. You're not confined by the body, you're not defined by the body. This is not you. You are simply using the body. You are soul or spirit. Or in the sense of whichever word you feel is most appropriate, but not this tangible physical reality at all. And that I was talking to someone yesterday in church who started a children's home in India, quite miraculous place. Very miraculous and wonderful. And he said, well, when I went to heaven, heaven was tangible, and the things of earth looked like sort of tinselly paper. They had no substance compared to the things of heaven. Heaven is the tangible. Rather lovely, isn't it? Worth remembering that. And repeating something that tells you, that reminds you that you're spirit. So, the Kriya that I was talking about in the last recording, is it the last one? I think so, yeah. I'm spirit. Or I am your spirit. The love of you. Thank you, Dad. I'm your spirit. The love of you. Thank you, Dad. I'm your spirit. The love of you. Thank you, Dad. Your spirit, in that you're a reflection, your particular view of God is your spirit. That's who you are, what you truly value of God as you understand it. And it's unique to you, your experiences, your personhood. You're a unique person. Therefore, there is a certain non-conformity in heaven that has to be accommodated by harmony, by this loving purpose to care for each other despite differences. That's what we mean by love. I love this other person. They are not my person, they are another person, but I love them. Now, why do I love them? Because they are their reflection of God, or they are their individuality from God. But it's the same God. In some fundamental sense, beyond my comprehension, the one God who's created all, our Dad, but he's Father of all. So they are, if you like, their view of God, they're part of God, and you're yours. And you need a great harmony between you, that you may be a great blessing to each other. And that's what we're learning here. We're defined in a primitive consciousness by the body, because it seems so real here. And we discount in large measure the spirit, although we do realize that others have a different thought structure to us, a different belief system, a different values, in fact. And we say, oh, they got a different soul. Perhaps we put it at that level of sophistication. Perhaps we don't. We may just say, oh, well, we're all individuals, aren't we? I'm not the same as you, but we ought to get on with each other, because we gain a great deal by getting on with each other, don't we? And we learn here to overcome differences by love and care and harmony. Or we don't. and it tends to destroy us and cause us great unhappiness. Now, one of the ways is, of course, well, there's plenty of space here, you can give yourself distance if you don't really get on with so-and-so. Just don't keep deliberately coming into their presence, because the difference is going to be a problem. Now, if you can't overcome differences with anybody, well, of course, you're going to be extremely lonely then, aren't you? And life is going to be very isolated, and you'll suffer from a lack of fellowship, or worse still, you'll suffer from a continual hostile society around you. So you have to find ways of now, one of the ways of bringing harmony is, of course, to conform, to do what you don't truly believe in, just for the sake of the peace. This might not be acceptable to you if the conformity is that, you're required to be a slave. I mean, you'd be so unhappy that the conformity is not going to solve your unhappiness. You might escape, that would be a harmonious solution. On the other hand, you might risk being killed trying to escape. So I'm not saying there are easy solutions. I am saying, though, that you're practicing trying to find ways of harmonizing in harmonious situations. And being civilized to some extent means you've got quite good at it. And you then may get some of the advantages of being civilized in your culture and civilization. So simply not running into certain people might be your simple solution in your society, and that saves a lot of trouble. You don't deliberately get in the face of people that are going to be hostile to you, and your avoidance of such people can be quite acceptable to society. You live in a different neighbourhood, and you join different clubs and so on and so forth. Thank you, Dan. Yes, I should come back to where I started to some extent, shouldn't I, which is thinking of claustrophobia. Then it may be that the physical world seems so real compared to the intangible, your spiritual personhood, that you start to believe in these dimensions, that you are simply a physical being. And so what happens to your physical body, for instance, is absolutely crucial to you. I mean, the very secular person, so to speak, may definitely feel that to lose the body is the end of everything. There's just death. That's the end of myself. This is the worst thing that can happen. And if it's not the worst thing that can happen to me, then I'm in some danger of not looking after this life and not living as long as I could. Whereas the very spiritual person, we can imagine, doesn't see his existence and being as dependent entirely on the body, and can take the thought of death with less concern. In other words, he has a freedom that doesn't seem open to the other person who is not mindful of spiritual things. So a solution to claustrophobia might simply be to get the person who suffers from such, to consider the spiritual and why they're considering the spiritual. That they have got trapped in this notion that the physical body is the all and everything to them, and that, bad things mustn't happen to it. They might have a phobia about falling off cliffs or something, but again, it's the destruction of the body, something that gets totally out of control of the body, and therefore is an utter disaster and annihilation of self. And if, on the other hand, they believe that no, self continues, it's spirit, not body, they'll probably still look after the body, but when they are confronted with a situation where the body's going to be annihilated, well, it's not, it might be the end of the world, but it's not the end of the self, because there's spirit and there's another dimension that they truly inhabit. Whereas life here was just an experience that was being given to them so that they could achieve something in it. The thesis here is that they might learn to be more harmonious, a necessary requirement for their eternal passage in paradise with the heavenly host in heaven. So we would encourage such people to be more spiritual, find out what their hatreds are. You know, if they got something that is making them very motivated to be inharmonious with certain people, is there some sort of understanding we can bring to this in their mind, that they no longer feel violently hostile to certain people or certain groups, that their, if you like, their spirit become, well, that they have both a view of themselves as being spirit, not just body, and that the spirit needs a greater freedom of harmony, both in this universe and in its own dimension. And the achievement of that will be the overcoming of the fear of claustrophobic situations. To the extent that it won't matter whether, if that's the way they die, that's the way they die. Because it's not them dying. There is no death here. You know, the person that thinks they're the body, there's death. The person who's convinced they're spirit, there's no death. I'm not confined by the body. I'm free. And that might be literally played out in that you have the ability to project your spirit from the body. That in itself is not a clear indication of freedom. Remember, you have come because you need greater freedom, freedom to be in heaven. The fact that you're free of the body might not mean that you have, you know, instant access to the perfect heaven, because you're not safe in such a situation. You're not safe to them. So I'm not saying that the fact that you realize your spirit means that you are free of difficulty. You're free of the body. When the body decays, it's fine, your spirit carries on. But your spirit needs, or will still have, some dimension that it dwells in. And that may not be heaven because you're not a harmonious individual yet. You're still a child, in spiritual terms. So your soul, your spirit, is not able to be part of heaven yet, paradise. You might need more training in these physical dimensions, and so we get the notion, well, perhaps you come back as another baby in another home, and you go through another physical life process and learn some of the lessons that you didn't manage to learn in this life. So it would be wise to learn them in this life now, Learn harmony. Seek to love others. You may not do it perfectly, don't get me wrong, but you may greatly increase your realization that you are spirit beings, and so are they, and care for each other more on that understanding. And so your spirit being, who you truly are, which is not the body, not this fleeting body, but your spirit being, matures, that you might dwell in heaven forever. Simply that. Thank you, that.